call for a living wage emerged from the growing concern in New Zealand about poverty and inequality. The concern has led to the formation of living wage movements across the world. The relationship between wages and well-being is well documented. Implementing a living wage brings benefit to workers and their families, communities, along with central and local government. Health and education outcomes and social participation all improve when wages are lifted. Professor Maurice of Victoria University wrote in 2012, paying a living wage need not be part of a zero game. It need not involve income redistribution. However, to the extent that a fall in wages results in an offsetting drop in productivity as effects inputs fall off, unit costs will not fall as wages relate labour costs drop. Both lower and higher wage firms, including those paying a living wage, would be equally cost competitive. Also, the lower wage economy is one characterised by relatively low outputs. It will be poorer. We have a low wage economy in New Zealand. We didn't have one 30 years ago, but we do today. So despite much evidence to the contrary, as shown in this statement and many others from researchers, opponents of the living wage will continue to maintain that paying people fairly by paying a living wage will bankrupt the employer. We're not asking for the living wage to be enforced by legislation, but that all employers do the right and moral thing by paying their workers fairly. Is your party prepared to advocate for a living wage that provides workers and their families with basic necessities of life? A living wage that will enable workers to live with dignity and participate as active citizens in society.
It's our party's view that it's better to be employed than not, even if it is for a few less dollars an hour. What we'll do is we'll make the first 20,000 of income tax-free, because like you know, that certainly that people can spend their money far better than the government can. So keep the money in their pockets, they choose how they spend it on the things they need.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Ooh, 1 minute. I love it. There is a significant difference between a minimum wage and a living wage. And the Green Party has released its minimum wage policy and its living wage policy, so 40 seconds left. Minimum wage policy is we would bump it by $2 immediately after the election, and then over the next three years gradually raise it to $18 an hour. Now currently the living wage movement declares living wage to be $18.40 an hour, so we're right, $18.80 is our policy, but your brochure says $18.40. I was surprised to see that. No, it's last year, sorry. Okay, well in that case, we are exactly in tandem with the living wage movement, but what we would require is that core government agencies and their contractors do a living wage.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I don't quite know what you think governments are about, but governments don't pay wages to very many people, only public servants, and that's all. It's actually businesses and private enterprise and individuals who pay wages. And frankly, for politicians to sit here and decide, we'll set the level, we know what's right for your business, I think is wrong. Now, first of all, I want to correct one of the misstatements. Every year that we've been in power for the last 6 years, we've lifted the minimum wage. We've lifted it. But frankly, if you're going to set it at an artificial level, why stop at $18.80? Why not let's go for $50 an hour? Then we'd all be rich. Now, you're laughing because it simply wouldn't work. And so I actually suggested, and my answer back there, but the beginning was the right one, lift the whole economy and everybody gets better off from it rather than artificially setting a level.
Act would not, a living wage is a voluntary regime as I understand it. It's different from the minimum wage. So the government's strictly got nothing to do with it. That would be up to employers. And some of the points made by the economists you quoted are quite right. Employers do have to make decisions about what's the right level of pay, and sometimes you are as an employer better off paying people more. They're more productive workers, they're more loyal workers and so on. But that is a decision rightly made by the employers. They've got to make a trade-off between the costs and the benefits that they get, and it's not for the government to tell them what's the best trade-off. One fact I'll add to the discussion, because I've already told you that we don't want to put up the minimum wage, is that high minimum wages are particularly hard on young workers. Is that 20 seconds?
20 seconds.
Because they don't have many skills. And what they need is a job. Then they build up the skills, they can display that they're of value to an employer, and then they can get a higher wage. Where there's a higher minimum wage, youth unemployment tends to be very, very high. In France, with a high minimum wage, it's 25%. In Switzerland, where there's no minimum wage, it's 3%.
Thank you, Jamie.
So you heard from the right, now from the balanced centre. Okay, so New Zealand First, we do believe in the minimum wage, and we would actually work with industries and all the employers and across parties actually to work out where it needs to go to, because it's something that we just can't dictate by ourselves, but we should involve everyone who's involved in the whole process to come together to work out. That's what New Zealand First believes. Yes, we do want to have the minimum wage set at $17, and we do believe that the only way we can go in this economy is creating more jobs. And that's why New Zealand's an export-led country, and we want to have all new exports taxed at 20%. So companies who are into new exports just get to pay 20%, because export is a way that we can create more wealth for New Zealand. Unfortunately, we're having a lot of manufacturing companies closed down at the moment, including Croxley and Avondale right now, 150 jobs going there, so we can import more things cheaper from China. But of course, every one job in manufacturing equals 4 jobs in the economy. So you're having 150 now leaving out of Avondale shortly. There'll be 600 people wiped out on the dole very shortly. New Zealand First doesn't agree with this, doesn't think it makes common sense. So vote New Zealand First.
Well, my answer is going to be very short and brief. The answer is yes. I was a little bit surprised to hear Mr. Williamson say that it was impossible. The government's got their hands behind their back. They can't tie behind their back. They can't do anything about the minimum wage. And then he turned around and said he's lifted it every year. It's either one or the other. But I'll leave that to you. Thank you.
Maurice, you do still have 10 seconds.
Well, okay, I'll repeat what I just said. We lifted the minimum wage, but I said it's not for politicians to tell companies and businesses what else they should pay on top of that. That's for them to choose. And I think Jamie's right. Good employers pay way above the minimum wage.
Thank you, Maurice.
The Labour Party does want to advocate for the living wage. Our policy is to, straight away, if we're elected, to have it for all public sector employees, the living wage, which is $18.80 at the moment. As well as that, obviously, we want to lift the minimum wage. We do not agree that higher wages actually means that people will lose their jobs. We've seen a lot of research, our policies backed up by international examples as well. So rather than believe me, or rather than believe the right on this one, go away and have a look at yourself. Look at the research between the link between wages and jobs, and you'll see that it's quite complicated, but there's plenty of examples where increasing wages doesn't mean that people lose employment. The other thing I want to say is about this idea, yes, Labour wants to grow the pie as well. Definitely want to grow the pie. But what we know is the bigger the pie goes, the bigger the inequality goes. So the pie gets bigger, the guys at the top get more. Yeah? The people at the bottom is what's missing out. So we want to distribute the pie evenly. That's simple as that. More fairer distribution of the pie is what Labour's about. Thank you.
Just some quick background. For the 4th time in 22 years, BP have submitted an application to council to build on the site next door to the church. That's at 320 and 330 Pakuranga Road. Previously, all the applications have been defeated at council, planning tribunal, and at the environment court. Now, each time St Mark's School and the parish community have had to find funds and resources and expertise to fight these applications at not small costs. The proposed development is in the centre of vulnerable communities, which are defined as the young, a primary school, the elderly, and the disabled. The site is bordered by the school and the parish, and the Pakuranga Park Village retirement complex. It is also across the road from Eastgate Community Trust, which provides services to the disabled. BP are proposing a development significantly larger than their previous proposals. If anyone knows, the development is the same size as design as the BP service station in Ludd Avenue, which is in a commercial area. Now, the proposed signage is 8.75 metres high, which would make it taller than the cross on the church. And it would be a visible and a significant because it's at the top of the hill. Now, while the immediate focus for our community is opposing this application, there are longer-term implications in terms of preventing hazardous activities such as service stations in the midst of vulnerable activities, vulnerable communities. Okay? So, my question to you, gentlemen, what will you do to help communities have the resources necessary to effectively respond to proposals like BP Petrol Station next to our church, school and retirement village?
First, let me say congratulations. You are extraordinary. Only 0.56% of all resource consent applications are declined. So if you've beat them 4 times, you are world beaters. Congratulations. Because 94% of all resource consents aren't even notified to the public. The public doesn't get a say. So when you're told by the gentleman who's going to follow me that the Resource Management Act needs to be gutted because it's really holding things back, nonsense. Now, the Green Party has had a policy for 10 years now. Ministry for the Environment has a fund for legal aid for people challenging resource management consents. It's that big. And of course, we've had a policy to expand that dramatically because we realize that the RMA only works when the communities can actually take on the big corporations, either in court or at council, get the advice they need. So yes, we would put more money into that, and that's been our policy for, well, I think about 8 years.
Thank you, Richard. Maurice?
Well, I'm very reluctant to buy into one specific example because these are issues that should be dealt with by council. Everybody has always said that central government should not be involved in the planning of communities. I've been told many times to keep your sticky nose out of things that are local and only deal with national type issues for the country. So I'm going to be very careful to try and say anything other than there is a process that's there. It should be followed. It's a legal process that if they have got the winning argument, they will win the debate, and if they haven't, they will lose. My gentleman friend from the Greens is right that a big percentage of applications do get through, but the vast bulk of them are for quite trivial things like a deck on your house or whatever. So in this particular case, I've had issues with people wanting to put lights at tennis courts right next to our house. I have no more say in an issue like that than anybody else in the community, and nor should I. Render under Caesar those which are Caesar's. I'm a member of Parliament from Parliament, not to do with a specific application right here in Pakuranga.
Thank you, Maurice. Johnny Whyte?
Well, as I said, Maurice would make an excellent ACT MP. It's a shame that I keep coming after him because it's been boring always to agree with him. But I do agree with him on this. The issue here is that people have conflicting desires for what should be done with various resources. You've got BP, they want to start a petrol station. It was BP, was it? Yeah. They want to, so I'm not familiar with the case. So I'm talking generalities. They want to do something with that land. Other people would prefer them not to do that something. So you've got a conflict. And we have processes under law, we always have actually, before the RMA came around, for trying to resolve these conflicts. And the problem is that sometimes one party's got a lot more money at stake than the others, and they're willing to spend more on it. And there are, sometimes you get no-win, no-fee lawyers who can help you out with that kind of thing. Sometimes it may be proper, in ACT's opinion, that the government help out in cases where there's no money on the side. But these are terribly difficult issues, and I wouldn't want to make a judgment on a specific case that I'm not familiar with.
Thank you, Jamie. Jon Reeves?
Right, New Zealand First, actually, our policy is that we want to actually review the entire RMA because it's been around for nearly 20 years and now there are a number of issues which don't work well, so we actually do want to have a complete review of the RMA. And that's primarily actually so that local communities can have more say on issues because we believe that local communities don't. Now, I can't speak specifically on this issue because yes, it is a local issue, it is dealt by the council, but the Resource Management Act needs to be reviewed and it needs to be, the way it's used throughout the country has to be the same. At the moment there's sort of different processes occurring all over the country. So we want to have some clarity on the processes everywhere throughout New Zealand. But for sure the RMA is in our policy for being reviewed, and so that's why it makes common sense to party vote New Zealand First.
John. Roger.
Well, again, what we're talking about here is, again, core policy for mana and mana internet. And I'm going to tell you a little story about an activity a similar sort of activity I was involved in just last year. The answer to this question is not just changing the law or legal advocacy, although these things are important. It's mobilising your community. Yeah. Last year, we were faced in Mangani or Tauhuhu, where I live. Mr. Morrison's government was going to, without any say from us, plough a motorway right through our community, divide our community once again. We mobilised that community. We had a petition of 7,000 signatures. We had big public meetings and we said no, and we stopped it in its tracks by mobilising the community in a big way. That's the way you win these sorts of battles, and good on you.
Yeah, I've got two things to say about this. First of all, I don't actually agree with Maurice that it's not a role for the local MP in this. If I was a local MP here, I would see myself as having a role. One of the issues I think here is a lack of consultation that's occurred, yeah? And also, you guys as a church not feeling empowered or sure about how to go about dealing with that. So I think there's a role with the local MP to help with that. I understand from my parliamentary colleagues at the moment that National are looking at Section 6 and Section 7 of the RMA, and what they want to do is really pro-developers, if you like, make it easier for developers to get resource consent and shut out more community feeling in relation to that. So I think it's very important that in both those areas is a link for the local MP to support the people as they process that and make sure that the RMA works for them as well. Labor's got some particular policies about how to make it easier for communities to get involved as part of the review of the RMA, so please check that out online. Thank you.
The Conservative Party are keen to reduce bureaucracy, reduce the cost of being involved, and through that level the playing field. I'm sure I heard our local member say that government has no place in local government. I seem to remember it was him and the colleague to his left, his party, who gave us the super city. And I'm sure that they'll all agree it's not so super.